Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are taking a journey into an absolutely extraordinary document from the Philippines in 1922. It's called the Dimasalang Kalendariong Tagalog. And you might think, a calendar is just for tracking dates.
Not this one.
Not this one.
Yeah.
This is a blueprint for life. It's a guide that mashes together fervent, by-the-book Catholicism with what you could call esoteric self-help guides with very serious astrological warnings and some fierce political commentary.
And it all leads to this really fundamental question we're going to unpack. Where did Filipinos in 1922 actually locate the source of power in their lives? Was it in God? Was it in this kind of mind power philosophy that was emerging? Or was it, in magic?
We're going to dive into a text that literally promises divine secrets, healing without any medicine, and even how to get rich.
All while, and this is the amazing part, all while strictly tracking every single feast day of the Catholic Church.
So the source we're analyzing is that Dimasalang Kalendariong Tagalog from 1922, and it's by a man named Don Honorio López. And this thing really was a cultural and spiritual compendium for the Tagalog-speaking people in Manila and the provinces.
Right, and this is during that really turbulent period after the Revolution when the Philippines was under American rule.
So our mission today is to really pull apart the layered and often very contradictory philosophies that are packed into this one single text. We want to look at that intersection of faith, of folk belief, and this new emerging idea of self-determination.
And hopefully we can give you a really complete and nuanced picture of what belief and control looked like in the Philippines exactly 100 years ago.
We have to start with the author, Honorio López, because his identity is absolutely central to the calendar's authority. I mean, this is not some anonymous pamphlet you'd find on the street.
No, not at all. The man's credentials are frankly staggering. He was a licensed lawyer, a Bachelor of Arts, an agronomist, a government-titled surveyor or agrimensor, a publicist.
And, maybe most importantly, a tent. Cornell, a lieutenant colonel in the Filipino army during the revolution against Spain.
Right, and that is, the ultimate 1922 elite resume. It's such vital context because when a man with that kind of military, legal, and academic authority publishes a mass-market calendar, it elevates the content.
It's not just folk superstition anymore.
Exactly. It becomes this serious effort by an elite figure, a man who actually fought for independence, to guide and inform the public. It's a perfect synthesis of high culture, law, academia, the military blended completely seamlessly with popular culture and spiritual guidance.
And those titles aren't just for show, are they?
Mm-hmm.
They represent real, tangible power in a colonial society that's built on agriculture.
Yeah.
You mentioned he was an agrimensor, a government-titled surveyor.
Mm-hmm.
In a country where land ownership and tenancy disputes were everything, they were sources of conflict and oppression. And an official surveyor is the person who literally draws the lines of wealth and property.
That's a fantastic point. The agrimensor was a figure of immense economic power. So by including that title, López is signaling to his readers, I understand your practical material struggles. He's grounded in the very foundation of their livelihood, which is the land.
So he's perfectly positioned to bridge that gap between spiritual advice and, actual practical success.
Precisely.
Now, when we look at the calendar itself, that blended reality just jumps right off the page. Its primary function is to be deeply Catholic. It meticulously lists every single day with specific saints, papal events, and major feast days.
And the level of detail is just so granular. It doesn't just list Christmas and Easter. It tracks specific town feast days, the Pista and Pentacasi in places like Icapo, Ternate, and Lipa.
So it's validating the local communal experience of faith.
It is.
Yeah.
For example, you look at January 11th, and it lists S. Higino, Pope and Martyr. It acknowledges that the faith is lived in these very specific communities.
But then, right alongside these sacred benchmarks, López is carefully, very deliberately, documenting revolutionary and nationalist history. This thing is a vehicle for memory and for resistance.
That integration is, I think, one of the most powerful insights the document gives us. It shows that for the average person in 1922, faith and national identity and resistance, they weren't separate ideas you could just put in different boxes.
No, they were all tangled up together.
They were inseparable ways of understanding time and navigating your world. He makes absolutely sure that the national heroes are commemorated with the same seriousness as the saints.
Let's pull out a few examples just from January.
Mm-hmm.
You see multiple execution dates for priests and patriotic figures. January 4th and 11th, he notes the executions of men like Inocencio Herrera, Burgos, José Dizon.
And we need a bit of context for that. When a reader in 1922 saw the death of Fathers Burgos, Gomez, and Zamora, the Gumambi or ZA martyrs listed on February 17th, that wasn't just some historical footnote.
No, that was electric.
It was. These were 3 Filipino Catholic priests executed by the Spanish in 1872, falsely accused in an uprising. Their martyrdom was probably the single biggest event that ignited the Filipino nationalist movement. It's what inspired Jose Rizal.
So by putting the GMB-URZA date in his calendar, Lopez is doing so much more than just remembering the past.
Yeah.
He's quietly reinforcing this narrative that the church, the Spanish colonial power, and injustice are all bound up in the national struggle.
He's putting resistance inside the framework of sacred time.
Exactly. And then you get June 19th, the birthday of Dr. Jose Protasio Rizal, the national hero.
And August 28th, which marks the Unang Hiya, the first cry for Philippine independence in Balintawak back in 1896. This careful inclusion shows Lopez is consciously cultivating a historical memory of, frankly, violent resistance and political aspiration.
And he's doing this right under the noses of the American colonial government, which raises a pretty critical question. If this calendar is openly tracking anti-colonial revolutionary dates like it even lists the start of hostilities between Filipinos and Americans on February 4th, 1899. How on earth did the American authorities allow this to be published?
That is a crucial point, and I think it says a lot about the nature of American rule versus Spanish rule. The American administration, while it was still colonial, it had to maintain this kind of veneer of democratic participation and a free press.
Right, there was a Philippine assembly, there was a constant push for independence.
Exactly. And Lopez himself, as a recognized lawyer and a former colonel, was an established high-status figure. He wasn't some anonymous troublemaker.
So publishing these dates might have been a calculated risk, but it was a risk the U.S. government found it politically inconvenient to suppress. They'd rather tolerate it than, say, create a martyr by censoring him.
I think that's exactly right. The simple act of tracking these dates, framed as historical remembrance alongside acceptable religious holidays, it became the sustained, quiet act of political affirmation.
And it was packaged in a document that the average person needed for daily life.
Yeah.
It just slipped right under the radar.
Blended in.
But the structure gets even more complex when we move from sacred and political time to, well, cosmic time. The calendar incorporates these very detailed astrological elements for each month.
This is the syncretism in full bloom. You see the path of the sun, what it calls an ara tatahak saptakdeng. You get detailed moon phases, new moon in Aquarius, full moon in Cancer, and then you get these specific predictions based on your birth month, a local zodiac.
And they're so specific. For example, if you're born between January 21st and February 20th, Lopez predicts that boys will be cheerful and wise. But, and this is important, they are endangered by water and fever.
Meanwhile, the girls born in that same period are faithful, affectionate, and wise in earning a living.
It just illustrates this holistic worldview we're talking about. The divine, the political, and the cosmos were not separate spheres of influence. They were all interwoven tools that the average person used to try and anticipate the future and structure their life.
Absolutely. You might pray to St. Hyginus on January 11th, remember the execution of a patriot, and then decide not to travel by boat that week because your astrological sign warned you about water.
And you're getting all that information from the same single page.
Yes. This blending allowed for multiple, sometimes even contradictory, sources of control to just coexist peacefully in a person's mind.
This incredible blending of the sacred, the political, and the cosmic, it leads us right into the heart of the calendar's core belief system. And it's a system that's advertised heavily throughout its pages. I'm talking about the promise of Ang Aklat na Ginto, which means the Golden Book.
Right. And Lopez is very explicit in how he positions this book. He says it's superior to mere medical books or fortune-telling guides. It's promising access to a secret power.
The premise of the Golden Book is just fascinating because it starts with very traditional Christian doctrine before it takes this very sharp turn towards something like Gnosticism.
It does. The core belief is established very clearly. The book is about the power of our diwa, which is our spirit or mind. And that diwa is the kaluluwang, the soul that was given to us by God or Dios.
And therefore, man is the image of God Larwan Neng Dios.
So far, so orthodox. Anyone in 1922 would be nodding along.
Right. But then comes the twist. The limitation that justifies the need for Lopez's 5-peso book. He argues that humans can't perform God's works because we don't know the Kalihuman, the secret of the power of the spirit that was incorporated into us by the Creator.
I mean, what a remarkable theological move. God installed divine potential in every single human being, but then he deliberately hid the instruction manual for how to activate that power.
And conveniently, Honorio López's Golden Book claims to be the unauthorized key. It's the key to accessing this divine power, making sure that your diwa, your internal spiritual engine, can be used for very practical, very material gain, comfort, a better livelihood, achieving your goals.
The tension there is just immense. Lopez is, on one hand, the faithful chronicler of the official Catholic calendar, and on the other, he's a purveyor of secret knowledge that you need to buy to activate God's gifts for your own personal benefit.
So how is that not heresy? Or at least a radical reinterpretation of Catholic dogma, especially in such a deeply religious society?
I think it navigates that very thin line between piety and magic by leaning into syncretism, that blending of belief systems. Filipino folk Catholicism had, for centuries, integrated indigenous beliefs and spiritual practices.
Things like the anting-anting, the amulets, and local healing rituals.
Exactly. And those practices were often centered on accessing divine power directly, kind of bypassing the formal and often distant church hierarchy. So Lopez's book is essentially legitimizing a long-held spiritual tradition that sees God as the source, but emphasizes that the power has to be actively seized through specific knowledge.
So it reconciles their material struggles, the need for health and wealth, with their deeply held faith.
It does, and the promised applications of this secret knowledge are anything but abstract piety. They are highly practical, almost bordering on magical manipulation.
The book explicitly promises practical occultism, tangible results, the ability to heal without medicine. Makapanggamot ng walang gamot.
It also offers power over other people. It teaches the reader how to influence or manipulate. Mapasunod niya ang ibang tao to literally cause others to follow your will.
And that promise of economic relief is just central. It claims to teach you methods for finding lost objects or even hidden treasure na patagong kayamanan.
Which addresses such a deep, tangible need in a society that's really struggling with poverty and economic uncertainty under colonial rule.
So this promise of hidden wealth, health, and influence, it's literally bought with secret knowledge. The Golden Book sold for 5 pesos, and the companion book, Karunungang Lihim, Secret Knowledge, was 2 pesos.
And that cost is a critical detail. 5 pesos in 1922 was not a small amount of money.
No, for an average laborer in Manila, 5 pesos could be several days' wages, maybe even a week's. So if this secret knowledge is positioned as the key to well-being and comfort, why is it priced to be accessible only to the educated or, the propertied class?
That really speaks to the nature of how power was disseminated at the time. Knowledge, especially secret knowledge, is treated as a commodity. And it's a commodity priced for those who can afford to invest in their own success.
So it subtly reinforces the existing social hierarchy.
It does. It implies that while God may have given the power to everyone, only those with the financial means to buy the instruction manual could truly activate it. Spiritual enlightenment becomes a form of intellectual capital. The message is pretty clear. Knowledge, even secret knowledge, is the primary driver of success, not just piety or hard work.
To make this whole esoteric venture seem legitimate, Lopez has to connect it back to some kind of unimpeachable authority. And the way he does it is just a phenomenal act of spiritual marketing.
It's the genius of his syncretism. The calendar states that the Golden Book contains the orations of Pope Leo XIII, which supposedly became the anting-anting, the sacred amulet or charm of Charlemagne, Carlo Magno, during the time of the Dos Peres, the 12 Peers.
Okay, let's slow down and really unpack that, because that is a masterclass in legitimation. He's taking a prayer from Pope Leo III, who, by the way, only died in 1903, so it's a modern, officially sanctioned Catholic text.
Right.
And he's claiming that this modern prayer is identical to the potent, physical, magical tool the anting-anting used by the legendary Emperor Charlemagne centuries earlier.
Yes. And Charlemagne isn't just any historical figure. In the Philippines, the story of Charlemagne and his 12 peers was incredibly popular. It was spread through these narrative poems and metrical romances called A Wit and Corrido.
Stories of Christian heroes fighting Moors.
Exactly. They were a staple of popular culture, deeply intertwined with the Filipino sense of identity as Christian soldiers.
So by establishing this lineage, from papal authority to ancient Christian legend to local Filipino folk, Magic Lopez is providing 3 layers of validation all at once.
That's it. A devout Catholic sees the Pope's prayer. A fan of popular culture sees the legitimacy of Charlemagne. And the believer in folk power sees a highly potent anting-anting.
It creates this protective spiritual envelope around the book's otherwise pretty unorthodox claims. It's an undeniable validation that the power being taught is ultimately sanctioned by the Christian God, even if you have to access it through secret knowledge and folk ritual.
The tension is resolved. Divine power isn't something you just receive passively. You have to activate it using tools that are historically and spiritually legitimate.
So if the Golden Book represents this esoteric path to harnessing divine power, the calendar then presents a parallel and almost completely different philosophy. It shifts the source of control away from God, away from secret rituals and amulets, and it places destiny squarely in the hands of the individual mind.
This is the teaching of Mr. Tuskari, the Japanese philosopher.
And this inclusion is, it's philosophically disruptive compared to everything else in the calendar.
It really is. Tusakari's doctrine of pag-isip, which means thinking or mind power, it reads like a 1922 version of what we would now call, extreme positive thinking or self-help psychology. It's a proto-secular alternative to prayer or magic.
The philosophy is strikingly simple and absolute. Tuskari claims that thinking, when you use it with your full force boom lakas na angkin, can achieve absolutely everything you desire in life.
Right. It elevates mental discipline into a form of reality manipulation. And this is tapping into a broader international current. In the 1920s, you have movements like American New Thought, Christian Science, and all these forms of positive thinking sweeping the globe.
The idea that your mental state directly determines your material reality.
Exactly. So Tusakari acts as Lopez's filter for introducing this modern, self-reliant philosophy to his readers, and he links it to the successful modernization of Japan, which was a regional powerhouse.
And the applications are immediate and profoundly personal. If you're sick or you're experiencing hardship, his instruction is to forget external remedies. Instead, you must constantly think of recovery or reversal.
The quote is, "Isipin ang pagbalikwas o ang paggaling sa tuwina at sukat upang umigi sa sakit." The focused thought is the therapeutic action.
This is such a radical departure from the magical promises of Section 2. The Golden Book sold you a secret ritual to get what you want.
But Tuskari sells discipline. The power isn't something you buy or beg for from a higher power. It's inherent, and it's accessible through focused mental exertion. It replaces ritual with routine.
And the most incredible, almost shocking example he provides in the calendar deals with the ultimate act of biological control, gender selection.
I know, the text gives these very specific instructions to pregnant women who are about 1.5 months along.
For 15 straight nights before sleeping, and again right when you wake up, the woman is told to close her eyes, clear her mind of all other thoughts, and solemnly repeat the phrase, "Lalaki ang aking magiging anak." My child will be a boy.
The intent has to be singular, focused, and persistent.
But the real kicker is the calendar's attempt to validate this with what looks like hard data. It gives it this pseudoscientific veneer.
It does. It cites an experiment supposedly conducted in Japan in 1907 and 1908. It claims that out of 2,513 pregnant Japanese women who strictly followed this mental method, an astonishing 1,942 of them gave birth to boys.
Let's just pause on that for a second. That's nearly 77%. A skew that large is, it's statistically impossible by chance.
It is. But the importance of the claim isn't whether the method actually worked. It's why Lopez included it. It shifts the source of power from the external and mysterious to the internal and supposedly quantitative.
This is a philosophical game changer compared to the previous sections. The Golden Book told you that your soul had divine power, but you needed a secret key that you had to buy. Tuskari says the power is the mind itself, and the key is just discipline and repetition.
It proposes a direct line from mental effort to a physical, tangible outcome, even overriding what we think of as biological fate.
It absolutely represents this profound movement towards self-determination. This idea of using pag-isip to control your biology, your economic outcomes, your personal health. It presents a path where the individual is sovereign.
And it subtly challenges the need for total reliance on either the established church hierarchy or the strict and often arbitrary rules of the colonial administration.
So we've got three distinct coexisting paths to control in this one calendar. You have the path of the church, which relies on divine grace and following Catholic rituals. You have the path of esotericism, relying on purchased secret knowledge and magic. And then you have the path of mind power, relying on relentless, focused mental discipline. How did these three things possibly reconcile in the mind of a reader in 1922?
Well, the thing is, they don't have to reconcile perfectly. because they serve different needs and they operate in different spheres. If a reader feels that their prayers aren't being answered, they have the esoteric option of the Golden Book.
And if the rituals and amulets feel too distant or too complex,
They have the immediate internal solution offered by Tuscari. The calendar is offering a spiritual and philosophical buffet. It ensures that the reader is never without a claimed source of control in what was a politically and economically turbulent world. The ultimate takeaway is that control, in some form, is always accessible to you.
beyond these grand spiritual and philosophical claims, the calendar provides some incredibly practical, almost mundane guidance for daily life, health, and even civic engagement.
And it's almost startling how rational and behavior-focused some of this advice is, especially when it's right next to discussions of magical treasure hunting.
We find this detailed list of rules for, as it says, en malayo pakasakit et tumanda, to be far from sickness and aging.
And what's fascinating is that these rules are almost entirely focused on behavior, hygiene, and environmental factors. It's this progressive embrace of secular, practical health knowledge.
This practical code for longevity is very strict. It tells the reader to sleep and rise early, and importantly, to work during the day, not at night.
It's a call for strict temporal discipline that really echoes the mental discipline demanded by Tuscari.
You should breathe clean air, expose your body to the sun. Just simple, powerful public health advice.
They stress consistency in eating and, crucially, not to eat when you are grieving or sad. Drink clean water.
And there are some beautifully specific, almost prescriptive details, like bathe with lukewarm water before breakfast, sleep for exactly 7 hours with the window open, wear loose clothing that's appropriate for the weather.
And it ties physical health directly to mental and domestic harmony. There's a line, "A clean home beckons happiness," kumakawe ni kaligayahan. They advise you to fill your spirit, your diwa, with amusement and to avoid quarreling.
So it's a comprehensive philosophy where your internal state, your environment, and your physical discipline are all required for a long life.
There's also that fascinating piece of social advice. Do not argue even if the person you are talking to is wrong. That is pure instruction in emotional self-regulation. It prioritizes social harmony and internal peace over the impulse to always be factually correct.
Which is highly instructive about the desired social fabric in 1922 Manila. It suggests a community where public decorum and emotional control were seen as paramount.
Perhaps reflecting that need for disciplined cohesion during the delicate political transition under American occupation.
They even tailor advice based on your job. If you work with your mind, you have to strengthen your body to balance it. But if you work with your arms, you should dampen or wet your head when you read.
Presumably to cool the brain and aid concentration after physical exertion. It's a comprehensive set of rules that really reflects the idea that control over your health and longevity is achievable through disciplined behavior and rational choices.
Which again reduces reliance on sheer luck or just external divine intervention.
Exactly.
But this rational, progressive guidance hits a wall, a kind of moral barrier, when we look at the anxieties around changing social norms.
And this is where we get the inclusion of Marpi Garcia's poem, Ayoko ng Saya, which means I don't like to dance. And it provides this visceral, detailed look into the moral panic of the era.
This poem is a direct response to the influx of Western culture, isn't it? Particularly the new dance crazes of the Jazz Age, which moral gatekeepers saw as inherently corrupting. The narrator rejects his lover, luring, specifically because she dances. He equates the act directly with sin.
The language is just so intense. It's saturated with religious and moral fear. Dancing is described as the smile of darkness, meeting dilim for a woman.
And poison to the beauty of a modest woman, lason sa ganda ni isang babaeng mahinin. The contrast between traditional Filipino virtue, being mahinin, and this new poisonous Western influence could not be more stark.
The central anxiety is the scandalously close physical contact. The poem details the intimacy in a way that's clearly designed to shock the reader. It describes the couple embraced, chest to chest, with walang pagitan, no space between them, the man tightly hugging the woman's waist.
And it describes their thighs touching or rubbing nadadaiskis and their faces close madalas magtali. To put that level of graphic detail in a public calendar for mass consumption, it suggests a profound anxiety in the community over this perceived loss of modesty.
The implication is explicit. Dance is a direct, undeniable shortcut to forbidden physical intimacy. The poet warns that in a dance, you will get a kiss even if you don't ask for one. A modest woman, a mahinching babae, immediately becomes indecent or magasla while she's dancing.
And it culminates by just weaponizing religious fear. It says that if a witness to this dancing were in a church, they would make the sign of the cross and confess the sight as the ultimate sin. The road to spiritual ruin is paved with dancing shoes.
The juxtaposition is just so powerful. On one hand, Lopez promotes modern mind power and scientific-sounding health routines. On the other, he includes a poem that vigorously battles against cultural modernization. It shows a society torn.
Torn between embracing self-determination and scientific progress, while simultaneously struggling to maintain these deep-seated traditional moral controls.
Absolutely.
And finally, Lopez shifts from personal morality and health to national civic duty, with his guide for the upcoming June 6, 1922 election. This is Lopez the lawyer and former colonel speaking directly to the nation's future.
He fundamentally links civic responsibility back to moral integrity and revolutionary sacrifice. He demands that voters honor the memory of heroes like Rizal by using their voting rights properly. And he issues this incredibly sharp warning against political corruption.
He warns specifically against being swayed by whispering or bribery, what he calls kakarampot na sentimos, a measly amount of money, or electing candidates who are just seeking honor, kapurihan, the superficial ones who only smile during election time.
And he uses the most profound biblical reference possible to stress the severity of this. He equates electing a poor candidate to Judas betraying the Savior.
And the consequence is terrifyingly personal. The voter, he says, will be providing the rope for their own hanging kayo rin ang humanap ng teling ginamit ninyo sa inyong pagbibigti.
I mean, that is heavy language. It elevates the ballot box to a site of sacred national loyalty, and the political advice relies on the very same internal discipline that Dusakari and the health rules advocated for. Use good judgment gamiting mabuti ang pag-isip as the primary tool for national salvation.
The voting qualifications themselves also paint this vivid picture of the political structure under the Americans. You had to be male, 21 or older, residing in the Philippines.
And it explicitly excludes subjects of other foreign powers, Chinese, Japanese, or even Filipino soldiers who are citizens of other nations.
But the key requirements were really about property or education. You either had to own property worth 500 pesos and pay at least 30 pesos in government contributions.
Or and this is critical, you had to be able to read and write English, Spanish, or a native language, Tagalog, Visaya, Pampanga, Iloco, and so on.
That native literacy clause is so important. It broadened participation beyond the old Hispanophone elite and the new English-educated class. It was a genuine, if limited, move toward greater democratic access.
It was. However, the disqualifications show the mechanisms that were designed to suppress the vote of the poor.
You couldn't vote if you were in debt for the miliarmiento, and that term is crucial. It refers to the land tax. Why was defaulting on a land tax a voter disqualification?
It was a very effective tool for voter suppression, particularly targeting the rural poor, the landless or struggling tenant farmers. By linking non-payment of the land tax, which was a pervasive issue, to your ability to exercise civic rights, the colonial and emerging political elite made sure that the voting base remained firmly tied to the propertied class.
Your personal economics directly dictated your political voice.
It did.
And finally, Lopez provides the ultimate practical voting advice. He's so fastidious about the technical details. Do not wet your pencil tip with saliva. Clean your hands and fingers. Use a clean paper or handkerchief underneath the ballot. Write the name clearly.
It's a beautiful final example of the calendar's whole synthesis. It blends the most abstract life-or-death national ideals, martyrdom, independence, betrayal, with the utterly mundane technical details of how to keep your ballot clean and valid. The stakes are immense, but success comes down to careful, disciplined execution.
So we've navigated the Dimasalang Kalendariong Tagalog and seen how this single, unassuming calendar served all at once as a rigid Catholic guide, a potent revolutionary historical record, a marketplace for esoteric spiritual secrets like the Golden Book,
And a platform for modern self-help philosophy with Tusekari's mind power, and a practical manual for civic duty and morality.
What truly stands out here is this persistent, multifaceted human quest for control. This is during an era of profound external upheaval, the transition from Spanish to American rule, and all this economic uncertainty.
And whether that control was sought through divine favor, or sacred amulets validated by popes and emperors, or just sheer focused pagisip, the ultimate goal was always the same: to secure comfort, health, and wealth paganhoa in a world that felt fundamentally unpredictable.
This calendar proves that the human mind rarely operates in neat, tidy boxes. Faith and the relentless, almost entrepreneurial pursuit of self-improvement can travel hand in hand.
Even if the methods from using papal orations as magical amulets to citing Japanese pseudoscience to control gender seem completely contradictory to us now, for Lopez and his audience, every source of power was valid, as long as it offered a path to a better life.
It reveals a society that was actively hunting for intellectual independence. The calendar sells the idea that every available tool, from the cosmos to your own meticulously disciplined mind, should be leveraged for personal and national prosperity.
It essentially taught the reader that they were not powerless in the face of colonial rule or fate. They just lacked the right instruction manual, whether that was a spiritual one or a psychological one.
So here is our final provocative thought for you to think deeper about. This calendar was published in 1922, a time when the Philippines was actively seeking political self-determination and national sovereignty. If the path to personal prosperity and health was found not in colonial structures or even solely in traditional Catholic obedience, but explicitly through accessing secret, hidden knowledge or sheer focused mental force, Pajisip, does this suggest a growing intellectual independence where the ultimate source of power was shifting from those established external hierarchies to the internal sovereign power of the individual mind? Was this calendar, in its eclectic mix of the holy and the esoteric, secretly teaching the roots of national self-reliance one successful thought or secret ritual at a time? Something to consider as you navigate your own sources of power today.